Let's talk a minute because Tamara has mentioned the culture, and we've all mentioned something about the culture. But what are some of the specifics you saw in lifting up or the cultures and the heritages, which is how Tamara said it, the heritages that we saw in the film? Do we have any specifics we can lift up about that?
Well, I like the fact the Wakandans spoke a South African language, Xhosa, and it was interesting that the Jabari that set themselves over up and against the Wakandans actually spoke a Nigerian language from the Igbo, and I hate the word dialect, the language. But I thought that was very interesting, that it really speaks to the attention to detail. Mm-hmm. There were the physical representation from the style, the dress, the hair fashions, the movement, the female warriors. All of these elements specifically came from various African tribal culture and heritage. They were very attentive. They were very conscious of their incorporation of these styles. And so this really presents meaning and the attention, even down to the scene in which T'Challa and Tia and Nia Nakoya were going into the South Korean casino to find the Claw, who had the vibranium to take him out, and even to the point where Kugler does an interview, the director, mm-hmm. where he talks about he was intended to how they were dressed and that they were actually representative of the Pan-African flag, the colors black, red, and green. And so just that awareness and that conscientious attention and respect mm-hmm. for African culture and the beauty and diversity of African culture, I think is also one of the elements that makes this film an instant classic.
Yes, indeed.
Something that people will continue to re-examine and go back and study the film and look at all of these elements, because there are so many subtle elements and so many subtle qualities mm-hmm. in the presentation of African culture.
Yeah. Anyone else? What do you think?
And I would add another element is just the music, the range of music, from the diaspora. I mean, you have folks from Mali, South Africa with music represented in the film. It's not on the soundtrack. I'm a little disappointed about that because I did about the soundtrack. But throughout the film, you just hear these musics and these sounds that if you're from these places, in the diaspora, you identify them immediately. I mean, I know being from here in the U.S. and that scene in the 90s when they were in Oakland, and Too Short is playing in the background. That is authentic to Oakland in the early 90s, So all of those were just signals to no matter where we are, we were connected and drawn into the film just by the music. I do appreciate the soundtrack a bit. Kendrick Lamar from Compton was the curator, for the contract. And so he had a few songs on there where he collaborated, with artists from other parts of the African diaspora to create music and songs in tribute and inspired by the film. But there are definitely, those musical markers. And even I think in that apartment, in Oakland, they had a Public Enemy, poster, mm-hmm. On the wall. Mm-hmm. So there are all those different kinds of touchstones that really reveal the kind of authenticity and a kind of truth of the different peoples that were represented in the film.
Amen. So the first language that we heard was the language of Nelson Mandela, Xhosa, mm-hmm. and which is also related to Zulu, which between the two languages, over 17 million people speak in South Africa and Southern Africa, Southwest Africa today. So I think the language issue, just to hear the first thing of people speaking, and then the music, something when you talk about the music, Victor, hip hop it's the new classic music, and it's all over the world. And so when you bring in a hip hop artist, a rap artist, music from and visuals from the era of when it was getting started, it automatically it's a uniter. It's something that brings people together, because music is something that brings people together. But in particular, this new classical music, if you will, of hip hop is something that is fairly universal. So, any other words?
Yes. If I may, I mean, it reminds me, because when Kendrick Lamar, see, it's the film that is connected to other things that are happening in the cultural milieu. So, for instance, Kendrick Lamar, a couple years ago at the Grammys, when he did his performance, he did a medley of songs from his album To Pimp a Butterfly, but the images and the symbols that he used from dancers, and other styles of African dance and sound, et cetera. But then at the very end of his performance, the room goes black, and there's a white silhouette of the continent of Africa with the word Compton inscribed in those iconic Compton letters, from back in the early 90s NWA days. And so it's inscribed. And so he's saying Compton, Africa. So no matter where we are in the world, we're African, Okay. So he took a stance visually as not an African American, but an American African. Mm-hmm. And so that's a shift in thinking that's happening in popular culture, Black popular culture, that I think is profound and that this film just builds on.
All right, then. Well, thank you so much. Anyone have any other words they'd like to add to this conversation at this time? We have a couple of new people that will be coming in on the conversation. Let's go ahead. Go right ahead.
I wanted to add in something I thought was really interesting culturally was their dependence on nature. That was really beautiful to see how when someone comes into royalty or into their position, they have to interact with this special herb that connects them deeper to themselves and connects them deeper to their ancestors. And I thought that was a beautiful example of early learning, how everything isn't directly related to books. Everything isn't directly related to this type of research that we do in the West. And a lot of things that were discovered by ancient Africans were done by internal study, by studying thyself and looking deeper into thyself to understand the world around them. So that was something that was really profound that I took from the movie.